Welcome back. It's time now for our political panel, and joining us is Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director of the Australia Institute, and James Bolt from the Institute of Public Affairs. Thank you both for joining us today. James, I want to start with you about WA's situation. It's not in lockdown after 3 cases were recorded there. But what do you make of what Mark McGowan had to say today and his response? It doesn't seem to be very consistent.
Yeah, it doesn't. Look, I'm absolutely amazed that WA is not back in lockdown, considering we are just exactly where we were a week ago. But at the same time, I mean, there were no new cases today, and yet still no one can attend the Perth Derby to watch West Coast Eagles and Fremantle, and nightclubs are closed for a week. This is a man that has absolutely no faith in his contact tracing team. He has absolutely no faith in the hospital system to be able to deal with any outbreak at all. And it just seems to be that the first course of action is to lock down the city or just to impose these new restrictions. It's like we only heard about coronavirus like 2 days ago with this guy, every single outbreak. And it just seems to be, it's just a complete panic every time there's new cases.
Ebony, is Mark McGowan copying New South Wales this time round by making masks a big part of their response and not going into lockdown? Or do you think that another lockdown is inevitable?
I don't think it's inevitable, but I think while ever the federal government is really failing to accelerate the vaccine rollout, all of these kinds of options, reducing capacity at outdoor venues, mask wearing, all of those are still the only tools that we have in our toolbox to fight coronavirus. And I think what's happening in India at the moment shows what happens if you let the virus rip through the community without taking measures. So while I understand that people are opposed to the restrictions, and many people, I'm sure, are very happy to avoid another lockdown, I think the reality is this is still a really deadly disease. It's still got a huge grip on the rest of the globe, and we're not out of danger yet until we can all be vaccinated as soon as possible. And the reality is too that until everyone is safe, no one is safe. So it's not only Australia that needs to be vaccinated, it's the rest of the world too. But unfortunately, we still remain very much behind the 8 ball when it comes to the vaccine rollout.
Ebony, you mentioned India there. James, I want to get your thoughts on the Australians stranded over in India, and they're now facing jail time if they want to come home while the travel ban is in place. Do you think that's fair?
This is one of the most disgusting policies I've ever heard of. This is an Australian passport, and I'm just going to read out one key statement that I think pertains to what we're talking about here. So this passport is to allow the bearer, an Australian citizen, to pass freely without let or hindrance, and to afford him or her every assistance and protection of which he or she may stand in need. Now, I've looked pretty closely. I can't see anything in, tiny writing about unless you're in India. Basically, the government is saying if you are in India right now and you are an Australian citizen, you are on your own. I think it's absolutely disgusting. It is hard not to see a racial component, considering that India's outbreak is currently killing less per million than other outbreaks in the US or Europe, where we didn't introduce these restrictions. I think this is an absolute stain on the government, and the stench of this one is going to last for years and decades to come. I cannot believe that this is a policy response.
Ebony, what do you think about the travel ban?
Yeah, look, it's not often that I agree with the Institute of Public Affairs, but I'm in 100% agreement with James on this one. Let's just call it what it is. It's a racist policy. It was not applied. This idea of incarcerating, jailing citizens for returning to Australia didn't apply during the second or third waves in the US or in the UK, or even, in the beginning of the pandemic. It is nothing short of this government really abrogating its duties and responsibilities to all Australian citizens. And I fear that if it's allowed to stand like this, if this becomes the new way that we deal with things, then we will have crossed a political Rubicon and won't be able to return from it. And what it will mean is that effectively Australian citizenship is conditional for some people, and the government can effectively withdraw the rights of citizenship for some people when it feels like. And Maurice Payne might say that this is only temporary, that this was based on medical advice, but the medical advice was to pause travel. I don't think it was certainly to fine citizens or to incarcerate them and jail them for up to 5 years if they try to return to Australia. So I think it's just more evidence that the Australian federal government has really abandoned all the thousands of Australians who are trapped overseas during this pandemic.
Okay, I want to move on to another topic. Andrew Clennell has confirmed that the Prime Minister refused to commit to the changes of the Members of Parliament Staff Act, which was requested by former Liberal staffer and alleged rape victim Brittany Higgins. Ebony, I want to get your thoughts first. Do you think this is a missed opportunity?
It certainly is, and it's, leaves the women in Parliament House and other victims of harassment in a really untenable situation, and it leaves them vulnerable to further harassment and abuse. And really, I think if you cast your mind back to when these allegations first surfaced, we can ask ourselves, what's changed in Parliament for women who are facing this type of abuse or bullying or sexual harassment in the workplace? And the answer is very little, aside from some reviews that are forthcoming. But there is plenty of things that the Prime Minister and his government could be doing. They've had a report in the drawer for a couple of years now with recommendations of its own. So I think this is severely disappointing, but I guess not surprising given Scott Morrison's poor handling of all these women's issues in the past year or so. And, I just look at MPs like Andrew Laming, who have all these allegations against them. You've got Craig Kelly, who's continuing to employ someone several staff have complained about. There's no consequences for these men, and it's women who are bearing the brunt of this on their careers, on their mental health. And, in the case of Brittany Higgins, just a devastating and life-altering thing that was done to her that will be with her for the rest of her life.
James, has the Prime Minister done the wrong thing here? Is this another letdown?
I don't think we're at the end of the discussion on this one. I noticed that the Sex Discrimination Commissioner also has an inquiry that's still open. So, I hope that this is just a situation where Scott Morrison's just waiting for all relevant, all people and this inquiry to come forth, and also to hear from Brittany Higgins before any final decision gets made. And then I think once that decision is made and once we see the changes that he'd be recommending, then we can have this discussion to see whether or not enough is done, because absolutely things need to be done. It's been absolutely disgusting what we've been hearing over the last couple of months and over a year.
We are unfortunately out of time. I know we had more topics to get to, but we'll have to leave it till next Sunday. Ebony Bennett and James Bolt, thank you so much for joining me.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.